Folks, thanks so much for tuning in again to Stockwell Day-to-Day News. We're even getting reports coming in as far away from Australia, people tuning in to the podcast and broadcast here. So thanks so much. Keep giving us the comments. Tell us about the things you want to hear more about. We try and follow that from you. And folks, just a ton of stuff today. Some of it kind of scary, some of it positive. So stay tuned. The first thing I want to talk about, China has really stepped it up in terms of taking on the U.S. relative to Iran. You'll know that, of course, there's been the blockade by the U.S. in terms of cutting off the oil supply money that goes to Iran and has funded the development of their nuclear program and all their weapons program for about 40 years. That's being cut off. Sanctions being put on companies who deal with, or even small refineries. There's a number of these small refineries around the world that will try and refine oil that's coming out of Iran. Iran is still able to use unmarked oil tankers and sneak the oil out of the country, and then they still trying to ship it to places like China. And China has now come out and said to companies everywhere that companies should defy the sanctions that have been imposed by the U.S. The U.S. is saying if you deal with companies, if you deal with Iran related to oil, then you're going to be sanctioned. And China says to these companies, we will back you. We, China, will support you if you want to keep dealing and buying and refining Iranian oil. So China really taking it up a notch. That's not a positive sign. In fact, it has delayed Trump's visit to China as they work these things out. So watch as that particular trend continue. China in the past has purchased about 90% of all the oil that comes out of Iran. So here you have this, we see this increasingly, this bond. It's becoming more and more transparent now between communist countries and Islamist countries, because they have one thing in common. They hate democracies and they hate free enterprise systems where people can choose their own work and where they want to work. So a real unholy alliance there related to China and Iran, and that is being even more enforced now. Well, the other thing that we're seeing is because ships are not being permitted to take oil from Iran and to allow Iran to sell it in countries like China. So what a lot of ships are doing, these shipping companies, you've probably seen it, and if not, it's a fun thing to look at. There are these global maps. I've been on the ship actually of a major ship owner from a ship has hundreds of ships on the water at any one time around the world. And because ships have locators on them, just as airplanes do, you can pinpoint on a map anywhere in the world where certain ships are. And because of that chip, you zero in, you can find out what's on board, you can find out where it's going. And more ships are now going dark. They're shutting off their locators to try and escape the eyes of the U.S. if they are smuggling in Iranian oil. Out of 170 ships, this was just yesterday, that were surveyed electronically, 146 of them had shut off their locators. So the underground market going hard to try to keep Iran alive. We see, in spite of that, and it still is mystifying to me how mainstream media hates reporting anything that's positive, especially positive towards the U.S., because that, of course, that means it ties in somehow to Trump, and the hatred for Trump, as we've said before, is so great. It's called Trump derangement syndrome, where people can't even think clearly. And as they say, if Trump discovered the cure for cancer, many people wouldn't take it just because it was Trump. But having said that, the historic surges in the stock market over the last week or so, the bounce back is nothing short of miraculous, really. And we're seeing, I've explained to you, remember we talked about last week how different indexes are used to measure how well the markets are going and how well economies are going. And one of those main measuring tools or companies is called Standard & Poor's. That's the name, actually, of a financial company that does financial evaluations. And the Standard & Poor's 500, then, they take 500 companies and they monitor them month to month or even week to week. and it's a cross-section of the economy to look how they're doing. And they're saying that the Standard & Poor's 500 is up actually 10%. The report out yesterday, it's the fifth best quarterly reports in the last 35 years of reporting. So the markets, and that is people who are out there working every day and supplying and buying and selling, they're actually quite positive. They're predicting that the Iranian situation actually is going to be settling down. Something's going to be worked out. First quarter earnings are up about 20% year over year. These are just remarkable forecasts. 83% of companies reported that they beat the estimates. Companies are required to put in quarterly estimates in terms of how much revenue they're going to bring in from one quarter to another. That's every 3 months to another. So they put their estimates out there, and they try and do it carefully because they want to be seen as doing well. They want to continue to attract investors, and 83% of those companies beat their forecast. Those are other positive signs. Can I just say a word here on the slightly negative side? There's also reports out today about because people and the banks and the stocks are doing so well, bank scams, and related to when you get those calls, you get those urgent emails from your bank saying, please do this urgently, report this urgently, deposit that, and a number is given where you can do it. Don't do that. And young people who are listening to this, you Gen Zs and you millennials, warn your parents, your grandparents and your grandparents not to respond when they're being asked to give money to their bank. A couple of things to warn them about. Anytime it says urgent, that can be a sign that it's a scam. And it's anytime a bank is saying, send us some money, or we need to transfer some money to protect it, don't do it. Tell your parents about that. Give them a little warning. Well, on the political side, the Washington Post has a story there. Some of you may remember the name Ashley St. Clair. She's actually the mother of one of Elon Musk's children. Okay, I'll leave that there. But has been a very strong supporter in the past of Donald Trump and everything to do with Trump. And she's now sort of renouncing that. She's saying she's not a supporter anymore. She's been listening and watching to other news. And she's not only changed her mind on no longer supporting Trump, so media will be making a lot of that. She's also changed her mind on the trans issue. While more and more countries are bringing out restrictions saying it's illegal now to chemically or surgically alter kids to see them transition. They have to wait till they're adults. Ashley St. Clair has flipped the other way. She said she used to be in support of that, but now she's on the trans bandwagon, so she's supporting it. I want to tell you what is really, to me, one of the most remarkable shifts in terms of opinion, in terms of positions. Tucker Carlson as one, Megyn Kelly as another. As you know, in the past, these were very strong Trump supporters, and they have moderated quite a bit. They've cooled off on that. They still call themselves small c conservatives, but no longer Trump supporters. And I was astonished yesterday as I listened in each of them, especially with Megyn Kelly, talking about the fact that they've been too mean and too harsh in terms of Islam and extreme Islamism and Islamist movements. And they're rethinking it. They're saying that they, Islam is really a much nicer religion than they had thought. So really remarkable when it's the all sources now of terror, all key sources, the main sources of terror anywhere around the world are Islamist driven. I'm not saying all Muslims are terrorists. We've made that point before. But here it's the Islamic nations like Iran and others causing havoc and death around the world, including the slaughter of Christians in many places in the world. And Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, and others who call themselves conservative, saying they're rethinking and they're saying Islam is actually nicer than they thought. Well, on the religious front, we saw today, and keep watching for the outcome here, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State for the United Nations, doing the little hug and kiss and make up with the Pope. So as you know, Donald Trump and the Pope had gotten into a bit of a spat a couple of weeks ago. There's nothing wrong with challenging views of whether it's a religious organization or a political organization, but some people perceive that Donald Trump just got into it a little too much, got it a little personal, and Marco Rubio is, trying to close that gap and patch things up. Well, in terms of other religious leaders, so we are getting word that Mojtaba Khomeini, remember this is the son of the Ayatollah Khomeini. Ayatollah Khomeini was blasted into eternity a few weeks ago. Mojtaba, his son, was also hit by, he was a target, and many people were wondering, is he alive? Is he dead? There was no visibility of him. There were lots of stories coming out that he'd had some of his face blown away, that he'd had to have a leg amputated. Lots of stories about him actually being gay. So just all kinds of things swirling around about Khomeini's son, but they still see him as a leader in Iran. And so the head of the parliament in Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, claims to have just had a meeting with Mojtaba Khomeini. Said they talked for 2.5 hours. He's doing well and he's strong. So we'll see. It's all quite secretive, but we'll see how that emerges. Well, another thing that's emerged, the judge has finally allowed the so-called Epstein suicide note to be released. And it's out there for everybody to read. If you want, it's not very long. It's basically he's saying, well, what do you expect me to do? Bust out crying? So no remorse being suggested as he wrote this in jail, allegedly. And he said that all of this thing is no fun anymore, suggesting he might be ending his own life. So conspiracies, what will that do to the conspiracy theories? Everybody's analyzing the handwriting. It does look legitimate. Somebody who was a cellmate of Epstein says that Epstein did indeed write that note. So that will push back a little bit, not much, but a little bit on those who are saying that Epstein was secretly murdered and didn't commit suicide. Anyway, we'll see where it goes. It's all good food for thought. We don't know. Again, on the religious wars, pictures emerging of, in Lebanon, an Israeli soldier mocking a statue of the Virgin Mary, putting a cigarette in her mouth. And this will be used by those who are saying that Israel hates Christians. Keep in mind that Israel is the only country in the Middle East where Christianity is on the rise, where it's on the increase. There's freedom of religion in Israel. I've attended many churches in Israel, right side by side with mosques and synagogues. But anyway, this picture has emerged, so people are horrified, as they should be. Apparently, this was taken several weeks ago, this picture, about the same time that statue was smashed. The Israeli government has come down very hard on the soldiers involved, but this is going to be used to say that Israel hates Christians, which I have personally not found to be true, and nor is that the evidence. Well, you want to talk about evidence, we continue to see, both in the U.S. and now in Canada, even more so, these city councils that are severely left-leaning talking about taking over the grocery store industry and thinking that governments can run grocery stores better than grocers and farmers can. It's simply not true. There is no historical evidence to that whatsoever. Any country, especially, and I've been in the Soviet Unions, I've been in these socialist countries years ago where they ran the grocery stores, or tried to, and even more recently in places like Cuba. Folks, it's a disaster. All it results is way higher prices and bread lines, long lineups, and all you get is bread. But some of the city of Toronto, the councillors there voted 21-3 that the government, the city council in Toronto, should be looking at taking over 4 grocery stores. Grocery stores, historically, their margins of profit are anywhere from 3 to 5%, usually in the 3% range, very tiny margins. And the only way they make it and profitable is because, of course, they have huge volumes. They sell a ton of stuff. So even if the margins are tight at 3%, they can make it on their volumes. Folks, these are always a disaster. They have been a disaster in the past. And why do politicians do it? Well, politicians, among everything else, they want votes. Politicians get this ridiculous notion that they can do anything and they can do it better than the thousands of people who are out there, millions in the private sector. So they think it's a real vote getter. What's more basic than feeding people? And they come out promising, say, we'll keep these grocery prices down. Of course, the irony is, remember, the single greatest reason for the rising cost of anything is inflation, and inflation is mainly caused by governments spending borrowed money. Government spending borrowed money. Every time I don't care what party, you see a political party making a huge spending announcement that they're going to make your life better, then you can know that means it's going to be more difficult for you to buy groceries or buy anything. But governments are moving in that, and we need an election in Toronto, the city government there, badly to throw these people out, these rabid socialists who are going to make life horrifically worse for everybody. This goes back a long way. I mentioned this some time ago, but you go all the way back into the Old Testament and the book of Numbers. If you'll recall, those of you may not be familiar, the people of Israel, the Israelites, the Hebrew people, had just left. They finally escaped slavery, 400 years of slavery in Egypt, and they're finally heading to their own promised land. But as soon as it gets a little tough to find food because they're out there traveling in the desert, they start complaining and they want to go back. And there's a famous song about that. They want to go back to Egypt. They confront Moses and they say to Moses, we want to go back to Egypt. He says, why? And they say, well, we missed the good food. And it's kind of funny to read the diet because they talk about we missed the onions and the garlic and the leeks. That's not stuff I'd be urging and longing to get back to. Now, that verse in the 11th chapter, Numbers, also does talk about cucumbers and melons, so that's a little bit better. But here is the key phrase. They say, we missed the food and it was free. The possibility of free food, the most basic thing we can get, free food, will win votes to socialists, and moving into government takeover of the food chain and grocery stores will starve us all. Please keep that in mind. In British Columbia, we just saw there's a court ruling. Remember, with the government taking extreme steps during the COVID and shutting down the trucker convoy and freezing bank accounts and doing all that, and many of the people who lost their jobs and were told they could never go back to work because of what they were doing in terms of the trucker convoy. There was a teacher who was fired back then, Nicole Coel Seafoot. She was fired because she, in her class, she talked up negatively about the Prime Minister, about Justin Trudeau, held up a cartoon picture of him, made fun of him. She was fired from her job, and she grieved that, and she has been restated. The courts said it was wrong for her to be fired just because she was opposed to what Prime Minister Trudeau and the Liberals had done in terms of people during the whole trucker convoy situation. Well, in Ontario, they have also, and credit to the Ontario government, they have allowed increased powers for people who are clearly, visibly, severely under the influence of drugs and on the street or on the transport systems and terrorizing people, shouting, screaming, attacking. The government has made it more easy for them to be arrested on the spot and taken to jail where they can simmer down and dry out. So that's a little bit of a shift we're seeing. Usually the policy has been over the last decade or so, as we know, of just letting it all go and don't hurt these poor people. Apprehending them, especially when they are drug frenzied, is an important way to go. So as they're doing that, as the government is giving in, clamping down on drug use, there's a big kerfuffle going on in Barrie, Ontario right now. Barrie, Ontario, my birthplace, where the school board there has been handing out pamphlets to kids, and it's called Safe Snorting. Safe Snorting, showing kids how to more safely snort cocaine and other drugs. Of course, many people upset about that. And really, the school board there in Barrie, they should pay a price. They should be diselected if they're allowing that type of thing to go on. We'll see what happens. Well, one person who also got fined on a totally different thing, this is in Essex, Ontario, a guy by the name of Joseph Bruga, or Joseph Bruja. He had to pay a big fine. Guess what he was doing? He was throwing rocks at geese, and he got arrested, and he got a severe penalty. And you know what? I don't have a problem with that. We shouldn't be out there throwing. I love geese. We shouldn't be throwing rocks at them. But you contrast that with the rock throwing, the gunfire, and the attacks and the assaults that many of these violent protest groups are doing with no arrests. People getting a little bit upset of that. And we see this as we have more incidents now, especially in the Toronto area, of yet another Jewish school being shot at and rocks being thrown and nobody being arrested, but throw rocks at geese and you're going to be in trouble. Well, last we were talking about Sophie Cunningham, the WNBA, the women's basketball player, professional, and she was talking about her coming to faith and getting baptized. Nicole Scherzinger, you may not have heard of her, but your kids may have known, or grandkids may know the singing group Pussycat Dolls, getting a lot of attention several years ago, quite a provocative group. She has recently come to faith, and she's talking about that and the effects of the music industry on her and how things have turned positive, that she's putting her faith in God, her faith in Christ. In terms of what your Gen Z, what your kids and grandkids are looking at with prom season coming in, what's being noted as people do the surveys on this, Casey Lewis has done some work on this, very upbeat about proms, people really getting excited, especially the young girls, about what they're going to be wearing. Dancing is back. We've talked about that, but over this last year, really, going back to dances, people are coming away from their doom scrolling and getting out and dancing. And there's a little phrase you might hear now because especially with the girls, they like to put everything online that they're doing all day long. So as they prepare for their proms and they're picking out their dresses and some beautiful dresses being looked at, it's called GRWM, Get Ready With Me. Get Ready With Me, TikTok videos, GRWM. They're showing how they're picking out their dress and how they're going to put this on and what they're going to wear in their hair and all that type of thing. So prom season, people excited, and it's being seen as basically a pretty positive thing. Also something else that certainly Gen Zs, as they move into the job market, it's called grid wiping. Grid wiping. It's where they realize that when you apply for a job, your potential employer can go back and look at all the things you've posted, everything you've done posted on social media, which, you do that stuff you put up years ago, you might be a little embarrassed about now, could cost you a job. And grid wiping, where people now, young people looking for jobs, are wiping away a lot of their social media. You know, the trend it's not a trend, it's a major fashion statement, goth, where it's dark clothing, everything's black, you wear the hoodie, you wear strange upside down crosses. Well, there's something called goth glitch now, where maybe it's a bit to do with this somewhat upbeat mood among Gen Z lately. But goth glitch is where you're, partly goth, but you're dressing it up with a bit of fun. Bright clothing, some fun-looking apparel. So goth glitch is kind of overwhelming, just straight goth. And as you go, you've probably heard, and this has nothing to do with the grocery stores, cottage cheese being hugely seen now. It used to all just be the yogurt craze, but now when people realize there's protein, and it's all about protein these days, cottage cheese, the price of it, folks, is off the charts, and a lot of stores are running out of it. So maybe think about starting a little cottage cheese industry, home industry on your own. Folks, have a great day. Thanks for tuning in.